Hello, I am Sourabh Verma. This year's G7 summit is held in Bavarian Alps, Germany on June 26th to June 28th. G7 consists of 7 of the world's richest countries. These are the 7 most prominent industrialized nations of the world. G7 countries have the highest wealth per capita in proportion to their GDP. So these are the countries which have the highest per capita wealth in relation to their gross domestic product. G7 presidency passes from one member state to another member state, and this year's G7 chair is held by Germany. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is the G7 chair this year. At the conference, United Kingdom Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, French President Emmanuel Macron, Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi, Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, and US President Joe Biden are in attendance. So all the prominent world leaders of the first world attended the G7 summit. Apart from the member states, the G7 chair can invite other nations to participate in the summit. India, Argentina, Indonesia, Senegal, South Africa, and most prominently Ukraine is invited at this year's conference. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy addressed the conference via video link, and he stressed on the need for a unified response against Russia's aggression. He also told the G7 countries that they should do more as far as the Russia-Ukraine war is concerned. So, more support is demanded from these countries. Russia joined the group in 1998, and then its name was changed to G8. However, Russia was excluded from the group in 2014 after it annexed Crimea. So, Russia is now no longer a member of the G7 group. The history of the conference is that this G7 group was formed in 1975 after an oil crisis emerged in 1973 due to the oil embargo imposed by the OPEC countries. So in 1973, an economic crisis emerged due to the oil embargo imposed by the OPEC countries. And because of this economic concern, all these nations, these 6 nations, were brought together, and together they formed this group called as G7. Earlier it was 6 countries, then Canada joined, and now the group is known as G7. So G7 was formed in 1975 as a group of 6 by France, Italy, Japan, the US, the UK, and the West Germany. The main objective of the group is to discuss economic concerns of the first world countries. So, as I have talked about the oil crisis which emerged due to the OPEC oil embargo, and this oil crisis has brought these nations together. These nations want to discuss economic problems such as inflation and recession, and how to give a joint response to these problems. So the G7 came into existence, and now what is the agenda on the table at the conference? The agenda at the present conference is to deliver a unified economic response against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The emphasis is to show unity in the backdrop of the war. The focus is on dealing with economic shocks of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the Western sanctions which are imposed on Russia because of war. So, the main agenda of the G7 conference is to show to Russia that the entire group of these 7 countries is putting up a unified front against the Russian aggression on Ukraine, and they are willing to go to any length to support Ukraine, and they are willing to support Ukraine as long as the war lasts. Of course, this war is not going to be a short one, as we have seen that the war has now entered the 5th month. So, the idea of the G7 conference was to put up a unified front, a unified economic front against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This idea can be summarized by one tweet of US President Joe Biden. Joe Biden tweeted, "We stay united, we stay together. This is our clear message to President Putin. Good to have you here at the summit." So, with this conference, the G7 countries and especially the US is sending a message to President Putin that they are standing firmly behind Ukraine and they will go to any extent to protect and support Ukraine. As far as the China is concerned, despite being the wealthiest country in the world, China is not an invitee to the conference. Neither China is a member of the G7 group. The issues which were discussed at the conference are energy security. After Russia-Ukraine war has started, the entire world is grappling with the problem of energy security. Since Russia is a major crude oil and gas producer to Europe, in which most of these G7 countries are situated, therefore energy security was on the top of their agenda. These G7 countries discussed how to maintain their energy security in the face of the war, especially if the war drags on. Then how will they are going to ensure their energy security? So energy security was one of the main points of discussion at the G7 summit. The second thing which was discussed is the soaring food prices across the world. After the war, the world has seen an inflation as far as the food prices are concerned. Food prices are increasing everywhere around the world, especially in the countries which are most affected due to this war, especially the European countries. There were soaring food prices, and therefore the G7 summit, soaring food prices was one of the main agenda of discussion. It was discussed in the conference that in this inflationary trend in the food prices, how these G7 countries are going to maintain food security and how they are going to maintain food security for their population and for the rest of the world. So ensuring food security in the wake of rising food prices was also one of the top agenda of discussion at the G7 summit. Now on the economic front, G7 announced complete ban on gold imports from Russia. This ban on the gold imports from Russia was imposed to first hurt Russia economically, and gold is the second largest export of Russia after crude oil. It is one of the significant source of revenue for Russia. Russians earn millions of dollars through their gold exports to the rest of the world. As far as the G7 is concerned, about 90% of the gold supplies to G7 countries were from Russia. So G7 realized that these gold exports are one of the major sources of revenue for Russia, and they want to deprive Russia of its earning. Therefore, this complete ban on gold imports from Russia was imposed so that Russia could not earn revenue through these gold exports. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy joined this conference by video link, and he addressed the G7 countries. He told them that they need to stand firmly behind Ukraine, and their level of support and assistance to Ukraine must increase. As the war is nowhere reaching its end, President Zelenskyy demanded that these countries should do more for Ukraine in order to support Ukraine against Russia's invasion. To this end, United Kingdom announced $525 million World Bank guarantees to Ukraine. Similarly, US also pledged a hefty amount to support Ukraine in its war efforts. So as far as Ukraine is concerned, the G7 group stands firmly behind Ukraine. G7 also viewed China as a rival and a potential threat. In this conference, it was announced that these G7 countries will mobilize a corpus fund of $600 billion for global infrastructure and investment within the next 5 years. So this corpus fund will be mobilized in the next 5 years, and it will be used for narrowing the global investment gap. So this fund will be used for global investment and infrastructure. But in reality, this hefty amount is pledged for infrastructure and investment purposes because the G7 is wary that China is growing by leaps and bounds through its One Belt, One Road initiative. China has already in progress, and it's going on with its One Belt, One Road initiative. It is a very ambitious project of China, and China is pumping millions of dollars into this project. Now G7 countries are wary that they will be left behind as far as the infrastructure investment is concerned. Therefore, this hefty amount is pledged by G7 countries, and which will be mobilized in the next 5 years and will be used for investment in infrastructure purposes. In fact, this amount will be used to curtail China's growing economic clout. The move behind generating this corpus fund was to restrict China in its efforts of One Belt, One Road initiative. The main aim of this corpus fund is to counter China and to restrict its economic clout. As far as the climate change is concerned, this year's G7 summit reiterated the concept of economic stability along with sustainability. At this year's G7 conference, global outreach of coronavirus vaccines were also discussed, and G7 countries reiterated their commitment to increase vaccine production around the world, especially in African countries. G7 countries reiterated their commitment that they should do more as far as the vaccine production in Africa is concerned. So all these points were discussed at the G7 summit. That's all in today's video. If you liked our video, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel.